Hi, YouTube. Back in the day when I used to work at the dealership, I worked with anywhere from 8 to 11 different mechanics at a time. It sort of varied, but we would often get together for coffee break and for lunch break near the waste oil disposal tank at the back of the dealership outside. This is where all the waste oil collection would go, and then at some point a large semi-trailer tanker would come and suck it out and reclaim the oil. And we called this the oil bin. So the idea was lunch hour and coffee breaks, we would meet on the oil bin. As many of us as could fit would sit on the oil bin, the rest would stand around, and we would crack jokes and tell stories and talk about our weekends and all that stuff that, employees tend to do when they have some camaraderie and lots of comic relief, because it was kind of a poison environment. So we tended to need that a little bit at times. And through some of those conversations, we would end up inevitably discussing someone who seemed to be getting away with stuff without any repercussions. We would talk about somebody who really needs a kick in the ass. And I came up with the idea, kind of a comic idea at one point in time, that we could form a group called the Karma Facilitators. And we could go around and give karma a little bit of a help, a little bit of a boost when it was kind of not seeming to take place fast enough or at all, right? We could give some karma assistance here. And hence the name Karma Facilitators. And again, it was all in good fun. Since that time, I've identified a lot of people who really think they are Karma Facilitators. And it's a little bit concerning to me, especially in light of the way things have gone, in the last 10 or 15 years. The way that social media and our connected lives and the hyper media focus on certain people sometimes. And, it's funny, if I think back, I don't think I ever really thought, if you'd asked me 20, 25 years ago, if I ever thought that freedom of speech would be such a contentious issue as it is now, I don't think I would have thought so. I think that we have a tendency to kind of take freedom of speech for granted in the West. That's not to say that completely we do. I think we appreciate and respect freedom of speech. I think we recognize that it comes from, that honest inquiry and the blood that's been spilt by certain people. But I'm not sure that we haven't taken it for granted in terms of ever thinking that we would have to defend the very right itself. At least not from other people, maybe from government. I mean, that's sort of traditionally, when we think of freedom of speech, we view it as freedom of speech from out of the tyranny of the government itself, out of a suppressive type of government. The real threat to freedom of speech today, of course, is from other people. The call is coming from inside the house. And there's a real chilling effect here that is extremely disconcerting to me. I will say, for the record, I stand on the side of free speech. I think it must be vigorously defended from all corners. And what's interesting to me to note is that the attacks on freedom of speech are coming from other people. And these are coming typically from ideologues who have somehow come to the determination that their position is unassailably virtuous. And so any challenge to their position is not just a challenge to mount a defense of their position, a rational, empirical defense of their position, but actually constitutes an offense. It's offensive to challenge my notions because they are deemed virtuous. And of course, virtue is not by decree. Virtue is by a rational, have a rationally unassailable argument, we're good, right? But you don't get to decree it. And that's what I see happening here. I spent a couple of hours last night going over some of the court transcripts from the Gregory Elliott case, the Twitter harassment trial that's taking place here in Canada. I don't recommend it. I don't know how those court people do it. It's a lot to go over. And I will clarify this at the outset. These are my opinions on what's taking place here. And I am referencing the defense documents. So there's obviously going to be some bias here. I haven't referenced all of the prosecution's documents. This stuff is enough in and of itself. I will link below the PDF of that set of transcripts, and I will also link below if I can find it, I haven't watched it in a while, I'm sure it's still up though, Stephanie Guthrie's TEDx talk, where she talks about repercussions in the real world for things done online and that sort of thing, because I'm going to reference that in a little bit here as well. Now, I will say again, I'm talking about the defense's documents, but what I'm going to focus on here are the Twitter exchanges in particular between Steph Guthrie and Gregory Elliott, plus the couple of other complainants in the case and Gregory Elliott, and also the testimony given by Stephanie Guthrie. So while a lot of the stuff obviously in the defense's documents is going to be biased, these are the objective stuff that actually happened, right? Her testimony and the actual Twitter transcripts of their exchanges. Now, if I haven't said it explicitly to this point, I'll say it now. I think that Steph Guthrie views herself as a karma facilitator. She is one who views her position, her ideological position, as unassailably virtuous, and any challenge of that position constitutes not a challenge to defend her position rationally, but an offense in and of itself, deemed worthy of some kind of real world repercussions. And I would reference as evidence to that a lot of her tweets, a lot of the tweets directed to or about Gregory Elliott, but also a lot of her tweets in general about these things. And I'm going to leave it to you to go ahead and go through the tweets and all of that stuff. And not all of them are in the transcripts, but I think if you look through them enough, you'll see. And also her combative nature under cross-examination from defense counsel. Now, of course, it's not unreasonable to imagine that someone would be a little combative when they're being cross-examined by the defense counsel when they're on the prosecution side. However, her combativeness isn't just combative. Her combativeness is combined with pushing her ideological position in the courtroom, talking about rape culture, talking about the patriarchy, and asking why certain questions have any relevance, as though she is the one who gets to deem that, et cetera, et cetera. Her attitude there and the things that she says, I think, lean towards this idea that her position is unassailably and unquestioned. It's unquestionable, her position. It should be noted for any of you who don't actually know what the case is about, this is basically a couple of people who got together originally because Gregory Elliott is a graphic artist. He was going to design a logo and a poster for the group that Janet Guthrie was a race car driver. Steph Guthrie was a part of, and they met for coffee, I guess, to discuss things. And then ultimately what ended up happening was she didn't end up hiring him. She was going to ask him to do, I think, the poster, but not the logo. And he sort of said, listen, it's kind of all or nothing. I would do them free of charge, but if I'm not going to do the logo, then I'm not going to do the poster. And then after that, they ended up in this ideological hot war, which is something I warn against, where they just kept ramping up escalations. It essentially was about the face punch game created by Bendel and Spur, Anita Sarkeesian face punch game, and Steph Guthrie stating that he should face real world repercussions. And I will leave again the TEDx talk link below where she talks about this, how people should face real world repercussions. And I think that's key. This is the karma facilitator stuff that I'm referencing. And as much as I don't like the idea of a face punch game, I think freedom of expression, freedom of speech is important there. And that wasn't actually challenged in the same way that Gregory Elliott's speech is being challenged here with this Twitter harassment trial, at least not to my knowledge. And these tensions escalated because Gregory Elliott disagreed with her escalation in the Bendel and Spur case of attempting to ruin his life, making sure that he got fired from his job and making sure that she could sick the internet on him, right? That this was a disproportionate and, equally offensive, but disproportionate also, right, in impact, because the punch face game has been done before. It wasn't just done, it was actually done before to a man or about a man, not just to a woman, in this case, Anita Sarkeesian. And it's obviously, it's a joke, but it's also meant to make a political point, I think, as well. And misguided as it is, I think, I would never do something like that. But these tensions escalated based on this ideological disagreement. Now, I hadn't been aware of this until I read the transcripts, but Steph Guthrie's attempt to bring real-world repercussions to Gregory Elliott also included accusations of pedophilia. There was an instance where I guess there was some woman who had announced herself on Twitter, and Gregory Elliott said, "Hey, we don't know each other. Why don't we change that?" And I think in an attempt to fend off potentially some unwanted advances, this woman said, "Ew, I'm 13," or something like that. And Steph Guthrie saw this as the opportunity to go to the police and try to get Gregory Elliott in trouble. Now, by all appearances, maybe any one of us should act in that case, that a 13-year-old is being propositioned potentially, nothing overtly sexual there, but obviously a little bit of innuendo, by an adult man. However, Steph Guthrie came to the knowledge that this woman was 19 or older. She was an adult, not 13, before she went to the police, and still went to the police with a pedophilia charge. So I think there's a little bit of a background here of someone trying to find any way to punish him for what she calls harassment, and she says she was in fear. But of course, a lot of her actions don't exemplify that kind of fear. And keeping in mind, of course, that Twitter is a public platform, and she never really explicitly asked him to stop tweeting her or talking to her directly, but she continued to talk about him. In fact, to defame him. There was a whole bunch of different hashtags, derogatory hashtags made around his name and that sort of thing. A lot of communication between her and her other Twitter friends, I guess, about Gregory Elliott. And he had at several points asked them to stop maligning him, to stop defaming his character. And there seems to be a very, very organized attempt here to bring these real-world repercussions to Gregory Elliott. Now, the interesting thing to me to note when it comes to ideological discussions and these hot wars is I'm always looking for consistency. And what I don't see here is any consistency with Steph Guthrie and her idea of real-world repercussions. This is the chilling part of this, because I think even if Gregory Elliott is successful in defending himself against these charges of criminal harassment, and by looking at the testimony and the Twitter, I can't see how any reasonable judge would come to that conclusion that he's guilty of criminal harassment. But even if he's successful, I think that the game is already up. The war has already been lost. It will only be worse if he loses. And of course, it'll be far worse for him, but it'll be worse for all of us if he loses. But I think the problem is that there's already a chilling effect because, of course, and I understand the reasons why, but as a victim, Steph Guthrie doesn't really face any repercussions if the charges are dropped or the case is ruled in favor of Gregory Elliott for bringing forth a wrongful, charges, unless he has some sort of a counterclaim after the fact. And she doesn't have any court costs associated with this. She hasn't had her livelihood destroyed as a condition of bail to avoid going to jail. Gregory Elliott has had to agree to not use a computer or the internet for the full, a couple of years, I guess, between the original charges and the final trial here. And of course, that is a very specific tool of his trade. Networking without the internet, pretty tough, right? So it's had a devastating impact. Of course, he's got to raise all of his legal fees alone, although fortunately there have been some fundraising campaigns. But I think anybody who looks on this from the outside, who might wish to challenge people, challenge ideologies, challenge people's ideas, might look at that and say, well, if I'm challenging this particular group of people, this might not bode well for me. And I think it's got a chilling effect, even if he's successful. And I think this is very, very dangerous. This is something we all need to be aware of, and I think it's something we all need to speak out against. I think there should be real-world repercussions for someone bringing forth a flawed charge knowingly. And of course, you'd have to find a way to indicate that someone did so knowingly. I think this parade of different attempts and apparently meetings by Steph Guthrie and some of her other friends to try to determine what they could do about Gregory Elliott indicates some of that intent, this sort of idea that we're going to get him one way or another. And that is indicative, I think, of an intent to bring harm to someone where you may actually be aware that there's no legal, he's not guilty of breaking any actual laws. So you're trying to find some way to quote unquote, to get him. Some of the other things, if you read through the transcripts, there's a lot of apparent attempts to mislead the court by Steph Guthrie. And under cross-examination, she's had to admit certain things. Other things she wasn't willing to admit. There was the instance of the email from Gregory Elliott where he basically, once it had been determined that he was not going to be designing either the poster or the logo for Steph Guthrie's group, he sent her an email saying something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, hi Steph, it's too bad we couldn't do business together. I would have been happy to have designed the logo and the poster for you, perhaps another time. Have a good day. Love, Greg. And she had testified that this was indicative of his seething anger. Of course, they were afraid of him, so they had to build the picture. They say they were fearful of him. There are a lot of things that indicate that they probably weren't fearful of him, but they had to paint the picture that they were fearful of him. One further exhibit that I would offer, although I have not been able to find the picture myself, but it is described in the transcripts, where after he was charged and arrested, her and several of her friends posted a picture on Twitter of them in aggressive poses, like fighting poses, saying, "Come at us, bros," which I think is indicative of the fact that they were triumphant that they'd actually nailed him on this. If you're really fearful of someone who you think is threatening you, you generally, I don't think, do that. I've actually been in this situation. And when you are finally successful in getting someone incarcerated who has been threatening you, your triumph is muted by the knowledge that their sentence, whatever it is going to be, is probably going to be finite. And you might not want to do anything that would cause them to look for vengeance or revenge when they get out. And so I think this is indicative of a little bit of, FU on the point of the women involved. And it's not indicative to me of someone who's actually fearful of the person that they've just had arrested. And so they had to build this case that they're fearful. So they had to say he was extremely angry when we told him that we would not want him to do the logo. And he was so angry that he said, it's one or nothing. Now, I'm not saying he wasn't angry. I don't know. But they had to indicate that he had sent them angry communication. And then, of course, again, when the email comes out in court and he says, it's too bad, maybe another time, love, Greg, they had to say there's seething anger, it's undertones in there. In fact, when questioned on this under cross-examination, Steph Guthrie had the weak response that there's seething anger as undertones to all of that, and anyone with any social intelligence can see it. Yeah, it's going to have to be a little more visible than that, Stephanie, I think. It should at least say something like, have a nice day. I hope you don't get any hit by any buses. Love, Greg. Maybe that would be an indication of some seething discontent or anger, but not what the actual email was. And her cross-examination is rife with a lot of admissions that things that she had said previously aren't actually the case. In fact, she had to testify under oath that he never overtly harassed her. There was nothing sexual in any of his tweets, nothing directly threatening, like I'm coming to get you or something like that. It could be said, if you're talking about maybe not criminal harassment, but maybe some other definition of harassment was taking place in the opposite direction with this organized campaign. You got to remember, there's an organized campaign of a whole bunch of people and one guy right on the other side with all of these maligning, malicious hashtags of gay hole was one of them, I think. There was a couple other ones of trying to defame him, call him a pedophile online, try to alert other people, as in this whole idea of this real world repercussions for things done online that Steph Guthrie is such a fan of. And again, she's not consistent with that, I don't think, because I don't think she wants any real world repercussions for a faulty allegation of criminal harassment, wrongful accusation. I don't think she wants any real world repercussions for that. So I don't think she's being real consistent. I actually don't think she's a very good feminist either. I don't know that much about her, but just reading through the court transcripts, there's a lot of inconsistencies there. So at one point she talks about how Gregory Elliott offered her a ride home after their coffee or dinner engagement when they first met several times, and she declined. And then he offered her, I think, a poster or a calendar or something like that, probably evidence of his work. And she said, sure, that'd be great. And he said, it's in my car. Do you want to just walk over there? And she declined. And she made it sound as though, here's this creepy guy who wants to take her to a dark alley where his car is. It was across the street. It was totally open and visible to everyone. But upon her declining that, he just went over to the car himself and got it and brought it to her. And what she said in the court was that he clearly wasn't aware of rape culture, and that's why he asked her to walk over to his car afterwards. Now, I find that interesting, this idea that he wasn't aware of rape culture. To me, I think when it comes to an idea of rape culture, that's a true rape culture, is the assumption that a man would only ask you to go to his car to give you something that he's giving you for free because he wants to rape you. Maybe the rape culture actually is within just the feminist camp. I don't know. The real rape culture, this assumption. She also is a feminist, and she's got a lot of feminist groups, but that didn't stop her from resorting to gender stereotypes in her testimony to talk about how he's a creepy guy. Of course, there's a lot of undertones to what that means. When a woman calls a guy creepy, what she's doing is she's attempting to incite that idea of a damsel in distress that everyone needs to come to the aid to, right? Here's this creepy guy. Who knows what he's capable of? I was fearful because this guy was creepy. This is supposed to spark this damsel in distress motivation in actually other men, ironically, to come to her defense, to come to her aid. So I'm not sure she's really that good of a feminist. She doesn't obviously view people on equal footing. She's obviously okay with gender stereotypes, assuming that, again, that the whole rape culture is actually the notion that any guy who wants to take you to his car to give you something is actually intending to molest you or rape you somehow and is instituting the damsel in distress defense to spark other people into action on her behalf. So that's my take on this case as I see it with the information I have available at this time. Your mileage may vary. But the main point of this video is to say that I think the war in that case, or at least the battle, has already been lost, regardless of the outcome of this trial. Because I think it will have a chilling effect. It can certainly have a chilling effect. And lives can be easily ruined by this. I mean, the battle is already lost in Gregory Elliott's case too, because I'm not sure socially that he's going to, that his life obviously is not going to be unaffected by this, even if he wins or is successful in defending himself against these charges. He's already had several years of damaged ability to earn income, damaged ability to interact and network with people online. And it will probably forever change the way certain people view him. He got fired from his job, everything else. And so there's certainly a chilling effect to him, but I think there's a chilling effect to other people as well because they see what happens. This is why I've warned against ideological hot wars in the past. Be adult enough to be able to argue with someone, argue your ideological points without going to the point of doxing, which is reprehensible, probably needs to be an offense in and of itself as a way to mute, chill your opposition. It's funny because we teach our children these things. And again, consistency, we don't abide by them, right? We teach our children, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And then as adults, we're fucking assholes. And we want to ram our ideological positions through, come hell or high water, and no thought for anyone else's feelings on or the repercussions and the ripple effects that these things can have. Because of course, Gregory Elliott's got a family. His sons have been affected by all of this as well. And it just boggles my mind that this is where we're at in 2016. That freedom of speech is actually under assault, and there's a real chance of taking some serious steps backwards. And if it were coming from a government, I think governments are kind of well aware that any attempts to really curtail free speech are often met with a lot of backlash. They're conscious of that. But in this case, the call is coming from inside the house. Thanks for watching.